Hey guys, Hugh Hendry. As I think most of you know, I was responsible for a global macro hedge fund. I ran it out of London between the years 2002 and 2017. So 15 years eclectic by name, eclectic by nature, uncorrelated returns. Was it the best macro hedge fund ever? No. Was it entertaining? Was it uncorrelated? Did it correlate with anything in the world? It didn't. It was unique. Regardless, I'm hoping that you will want to hear my story. This is the story of someone growing up with investors, with responsibility to write a letter each month, a letter of culpability. Typically, I'm really sorry I had this great idea. Typically, it was we were just too early. But if you was, it's like my diary, and therefore it's a masterclass. And I hope if you can be persuaded to stay tuned as we go through these monthlies. I'm going to shoot about 10 minutes. I fear it's going to be deadly dull, but there were just so many things happening in my life. My life, I used to say the curse was too many interesting things, too many great anecdotes for going to dinner and sharing people. And so hopefully we can bring out those anecdotes, because this was such an amazing time. Crispin Odie and I was working within the confines of the partnership. I was a partner at Odie Asset Management, and Crispin had for many years been re-establishing his immense credibility after the debacle he suffered way back in 1994 when he got trapped in a position in British gilts. I don't want to get stuck on that, but he could see he was very much on the cusp of being forgiven, if you will, and assets were beginning to grow again. But we were managing a very, very small amount of money compared to where the world accords genius today. And we had very, very small, tight, very, very eccentric staff. And Crispin was loath to let me, he could see something of his character, perhaps, something of his madness, perhaps more appropriately, in the management of a hedge fund. I remember he said, there's no handbook. It's like driving a sports car, and like kids, you want to drive it really, really fast. And so he was really worried that to give me the keys to this Ferrari and the damage that I could do, not only to myself, but of course to his reputation, that he had worked so fastidiously on trying to repair. So that was the kind of backdrop. Why don't I kind of plunge straight in? Because for a first month, and I'd ask you again to remember that most hedge funds fail in the first year. That's the thing that's uppermost in your mind. Most hedge funds fail in the first year. It's kind of like a restaurant. It's why a good restaurant, a restaurant that endures, is a restaurant that typically makes a lot of money, like our hedge fund brethren today. And in the month of October 2002, I lost 4.8. I'm going to say it again. I lost 4.8% when the markets were up 8. What were they up? The benchmark we used was the FTSE, the FTSE All Share, which is an equity index. Remember, we were deemed to be this was like a private client vehicle back in the day. No institutional investors, family offices were the investors, and it had been a great month for equities. And there is scant detail in this report. I have copied the report, and you can read the report at your own leisure, but I mean, it doesn't say anything in terms of marks out of 10, very much 1 out of 10. Would you believe I was almost 102% gross long? My shorts, what do you think, 40% short? My shorts were less than 1%. So I was 101% net long. The market was up 8%, and Hendry was down the best part of 5%. And there's no mention to whatever it was that was eating away at me. The only hint is in the opening sentence when I say The European Central Bank got it wrong. How often have you heard me say that? It began in my first letter. The ECB had last cut interest rates almost a year before I had launched this fund. It had taken rates down from, I think, 3.75%, and it cut rates by 1.5% over. Actually, it got quite aggressive to the tail end of 2001 with almost like monthly cuts. But from November 01, nothing, absolutely nothing. Whereas the Fed had been very proactive. And so I imagine when I see those returns, I have to imagine because it's not in this report, but I imagine, and forgive me because I'm moving around, let me get closer. I imagine that I had a very large interest rate futures position, which was with little life left, which was there anticipating that we would get a rate cut. No rate cut, no P&L, and probably we were playing something with time, and so we probably lost money for the time lost on that adventure. And of course, irony of ironies, I think we were. It was December before we got the next cut. Equity markets were clearly anticipating it. And then what I want to do is that in these reports, we attempted to give a stock insight or a trade insight to try and explain the nature of the thinking, to try and be transparent. And when I see the stock insights were these yellow pages, these classified directory books, and when I look at the top long holdings, we were pretty much, I guess let's call it the Ben Graham buffing on the cigars at the last embers of the great TMT smash. We were buying stocks which had fallen 80 or 90%. And the one we gave reference to in the report was Eniro. And I've checked before doing this. Eniro is still listed today. That's not saying much. Eniro has had a really, really tough time. So back then, it had been a darling. Back then, it was going to use this cash flow and it was going to be an internet platform. It didn't work out. It has wasted a huge amount of money on a venture in Germany. But it closed it, and Yellow Pages were like a utility cash generating thing. You really still didn't have Google. And we all had these big, thick books. Just I feel old when I talk about this stuff. And with the cash flow, so if you take the free cash flow, so you're taking account of any movements in working capital, you're looking at the kind of capex, you're trying to normalize capex to depreciation in your figuring. You're trying to find the cash flow that that would be attributable to you as the equity investor, having paid out the stakeholders, tax to the government, the interest payments to the banks, to the debt holders, like maintaining the nature of the business intact, so investing in the business, the creditors of the business. That's why we look at working capital, and if we're expressing whatever that cash flow figure was vis-a-vis the market capitalization. And back then we were attracted by this 10% ratio, and we had an investment. Knowing me, we wouldn't have had a very large investment. I was like, I always wanted to say, I was like the centipede. I wanted to have an idea, and I wanted to have that idea expressed into like 100 iterations, because I was constantly, the book we were constantly, during the day you had to write. I'm getting excited and getting sentimental, but my trader sat beside me with a big book. It was like a Charles Dickens story, very Victorian, and you hand wrote all of the trades, and I want to say we did about 20 pages of trades every day. If you remember, there'd been that, I think Danny Boyle made a movie about it, about the climber in some US state, and he gets his arm trapped in a boulder, and he's on his own, and he can't free the arm, and he's gonna die unless he gets his arm out, and perhaps the only way he can get his arm out is by cutting his arm off. And understandably, having only two arms and two legs, 2 arms, he procrastinates like I would. Like, really, I want to cut this arm off. Sure, I'm going to die if I cut this arm off, but I'm going to die if I don't cut it off. You know, back and forward. And so for me, I didn't want to have just 2 positions. I wanted to have 100 positions, and I was selling them every day and buying them back every day, just as I kind of try to gauge sentiment. I try to gauge where I was in terms of my understanding. Remember, I was always kind of like, I was looking at the charts. The charts were like sheet music, and they were conjuring up images, and then I would have this really smart pool of talented individuals who then try and go out and corroborate and legitimize what I was feeling coming through in these chart expressions. Hence, they came back with the cash flow figures. However, to wind it up, Eniro was a dying business. I'd have been better placed elsewhere. It was very much a distraction from my interest rates, which were the big story. I think we'll go on and we'll discuss that. I started the fund pretty much at the lows of European equities, but it took us a bit like gold, and we're going to talk about gold in the next series. But gold and equities kind of were very, very volatile and kind of went sideways for the next 3 or 4 months. And it was a challenging baptism of fire. But between the end of 2002 and the middle of 2005, European stocks doubled, kind of went back, touched the high. And Eniro, I think, matched that. But in terms of, like, okay, so the market doubled, that's good. And we found a stock and it doubled, that's not great. So, poor business that we bought, should have done better. And did I mention that my son was born that month? My son was born with silent reflux. And so he was a baby who cried every day of that month. And my wife, who cared for him, cried every day because he was crying. And with me being down 4.8% and the market being up 8%, believe me, I was crying with them. So, no more tears. If you're interested, I'm going to do this exercise again, and we're going to talk about November 2002. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.